What's up, guys? Welcome back to the SNS College Football Podcast. This will be our Week 2 recap, Week 3 preview. And last week wasn't the greatest slate of games, but there were some interesting games. I think a lot of those like mid-tier games that we were looking forward to that didn't actually end up being too competitive, like Duke Northwestern, Iowa State, Iowa. I think some of those games seemed like the weather from hurricane whatever played a part in that. But, we still had a couple marquee games that we'll call them, I guess, that we'll go over. We'll go over our bets that were both good and bad. We'll give our winners and losers for the week, and then we'll jump into our Week 3 stuff. So, first game we had, I guess we'll talk about Georgia at South Carolina, a game that I think a lot of people were curious to see if South Carolina was actually for real this year. We wanted to see if Georgia still, was the team that we thought they were going to be coming into the year. And I think Georgia proved that it's, especially with how, in my opinion, with how Florida looked against Kentucky, and by look, I mean just getting whipped. I think Georgia's got a pretty good road ahead in the East there.
Yeah, statement game for sure for the Bulldogs. I think a lot of people circled this as a potential trap or just a potential spot for them to, get knocked off. Road game within the conference. South Carolina looked to be, on the uptick in terms of recruiting and production. Complete, stomp, right on the throat of Will Muschamp. Kirby Smart and crew laid it on them. It was about a 10-point spread. I think the final number ended up, and they covered that easily with a 41-17 point victory. They looked pretty impressive in all phases of the game, and they got out to a fast start. I think it says more about them than it really does about South Carolina. I don't really downgrade them in terms of a next week or future preview for them. I don't think they're far worse than anybody thought they were. I just think Georgia's as advertised or possibly even better than advertised.
Yeah, for sure.
So I don't know, who do they have next week? Do they have a bye?
Georgia has Austin Peay.
Nah, Middle Tennessee.
Middle Tennessee. Oh, they played Austin Peay week 1. Yeah, they have Middle Tennessee, right?
Yeah, so probably no chance for a relapse there. You'd always look for a potential trap game if they, coming off a difficult or a big road game in conference or whatnot. But nothing in terms of betting there, most likely. But really impressive by them. And as they march on, like you kind of pointed out, their path to the SEC title game is pretty clear cut now.
Yeah, they, coming into the year, I said my prediction as far as the playoffs, where I said Georgia was certainly a national title contender. I didn't have them making the playoff. 2 weeks in, I'm not going to change any of my playoff picks or anything like that. That might be something that we give ourselves, we'll call it a mulligan when we get halfway through the year, and maybe we'll address that. But what I will say is each week, this isn't an official thing that we've talked about doing, but maybe we will kind of give some kind of power ranking, maybe in an unofficial manner. And I think Georgia, for me, they look even faster than what they did last year. I saw elite speed on offense and defense. I like the fact that if something happens to him, the backup might be better. He might be more talented. I don't know if he's as ready to play as Fromm. It's a similar situation to Clemson, which we'll talk about in a few minutes here. But going into this game, I think I was the only one on the podcast that bet it. And I said on last week's pod, when Addison and I, we both agreed that right away off the surface, we thought maybe we would lean South Carolina, getting the points. It's a game that they usually are up for. They usually play Georgia well in the past. This was a year that we felt like South Carolina had a much improved offense, and that's what would keep that number close. However, when I dug into South Carolina's Week 1 game, I don't remember who they played. It wasn't somebody very good, but they gave up a lot of yards per play on the ground. Their defense seemed a lot more leaky than what I'm used to from Muschamp, and I just felt like Georgia would take full advantage of that, and they did. They ran all over them. They were much faster. Georgia, like Steele said, I think South Carolina, I I don't think this makes me think any worse of South Carolina, but I think that much more of Georgia, and I think right now, just based on who teams have played so far, South Carolina's competent. And so I think that Georgia's probably my second best team in the country right now. I was very impressed with them. So I look forward to seeing them later in the year when they do have to play teams like Auburn and whoever else they have, like Florida. I'm not as impressed with, so I'm not looking forward to that game as much anymore. But it's going to be tough for Georgia to get beat before they get to the SEC title game. So let's move on to the second game that was like the marquee game of the week. Clemson at Texas A&M, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think this was another game that people felt like could be like a trap. It could be like a tough game potentially.
Yeah, I mean, SEC foe, whether the talent's there for Jimbo yet or not, it's kind of to be determined.
Yeah.
But still a road game in a hostile environment. Kyle Field's notorious for being, pretty hard place to play. I'll be honest with you, I didn't even watch the second half. I went to bed.
Yeah.
I saw a couple of plays in the first half, just kind of flipping between games. But what I did see was a pretty composed Kelly Bryant, which was kind of our prediction that Lawrence would eventually take the reins and say, "Okay, I'm better than you."
Mm-hmm.
Take the team, kind of put him on his shoulders. But I think it was Kelly Bryant from what I saw highlight-wise as well as in the first half that kind of calmed the tide. A&M made a run there and obviously was, close in the end, covering easily the 11-point spread. But the play of Kelly Bryant, at least, like I said, from what I saw, was pretty impressive. And obviously the D-line was always pretty stout for Clemson. So.
Yeah. No, you nailed it pretty good without even seeing the game. I think Clemson seemed to have control for the most part, and like A&M would come back and do something, whether it was get some points on the board or make some plays. Then Clemson would answer as championship teams do. But I was pretty impressed with A&M. I think that was a team this year that we felt was kind of like a wild card, like a team that we felt like had some talent, and we wanted to see how, like if they would buy into Jimbo right away and whatnot. But Steele said as far as how good A&M is, I still think time will tell. I don't think we're quite too sure of that yet. I mean, they played Clemson tough, and it was by all means, it seemed like a tough environment. I said on last week's pod, I felt like Kyle Field was kind of an overrated venue, but they seemed up for that game. It was a pretty darn good atmosphere from what I saw the whole time watching that game. Steele alluded to Kelly Bryant was, I think, the reason that Clemson kept their composure on offense and finished off some drives and, were able to get out of there with a win. Lawrence, he looks like the more talented quarterback, but he was a little shaky in this game, and you could tell it might have been like, one of those spots where a true freshman wasn't quite ready to play. Bryant, he wasn't amazing by any means, but he was good. And I think it's going to be interesting moving forward to see what happens now, because I think we on this podcast felt like it's not like we don't maybe think Lawrence won't eventually still take over the season, but Bryant's making it tougher and tougher for Dabo to really make that decision, kind of, go clean cut like one quarterback with Lawrence. And for me personally, I know how Addison feels about the rotating quarterbacks. I'll let Steele give an opinion on that in a sec, but I think that's an issue for me for Clemson as far as moving forward. Like I think this is a very talented team. Their secondary looked a little leaky. Mon from A&M played very well last year. I thought he was not very good, and that was one of my question marks about A&M this year. So I don't worry as much about Clemson's secondary though, because I think they'll improve with the talent they have. And when you have a D line like that, it's going to help kind of cover up your holes in the secondary, I think, a lot of the time. So I am still questioning the rotating quarterback system that Dabo's got going on. What do you think about that? Is that going to be a problem? Like, is that to be determined type of thing?
Yeah, well, I thought it was going to be a problem.
Yeah.
But not based on their remaining schedule.
Yeah.
I thought at Florida State might have been a troubling game. Georgia Tech with the triple option is always a difficult matchup. But I think it's dependent on the type of players they are and the type of people they are.
Yeah.
every report that you read is, that both guys are willing to, almost concede reps to each other,
Sure.
If it's for the benefit of the team.
Right.
And I think both of their player skill sets complement each other quite well. It's not that Kelly Bryant can't throw
Sure.
or Trevor Lawrence can't run. They do enough to balance the offensive play calling, no matter who's in the game. So it's not like, okay, number two's in, they're doing this, or vice versa.
Sure.
So I think for Dabo, and like you pointed out, it makes it a lot easier when you're running 8 NFL guys out there on defense.
Yeah.
Constantly at the other team. They're not always having to put their quarterback in a position to make a play,
right,
or get the ball to all their other playmakers on the field is not that difficult either. So it's not like they're going out there to have to make the play to make get the win or whatnot.
Yeah.
So I don't see it troubling them the rest of the year. Like I said, a tricky matchup with Georgia Tech on the road. Georgia Tech's offense looks pretty impressive. If they can neutralize some of that D-line, Florida State looks like garbage.
Yes.
Like pure trash. Like,
struggled, almost lost at home to Samford.
Dumpster fire.
Yeah. I won't say.
Yeah, dumpster fire.
Yeah, if they lose to Syracuse, I think we'll start talking dumpster fire.
Yeah. Willie.
But I think
Willie,
whoa, Willie. You know what? That's the thing that kind of sucks too. Is he seems like a good guy. He grew up in that state. I think he grew up rooting for Florida State. I hope he turns it around.
I think a good litmus test for Clemson actually is you kind of just trickle down through their schedules.
Yeah.
I don't think they really are super challenged by anybody until possibly late in the year to see if South Carolina kind of regathers their composure for an interstate matchup rivalry game there. That game's at Clemson.
I think they're at BC too, aren't they?
Yeah, but they suck.
Okay. You think they suck? Okay.
Don't let Corey or any other person tell you otherwise. Boston College is not good at football.
Okay, yeah.
But
right. So
I'm curious to see if South Carolina kind of regathers and kind of rights the ship, or got their doors blown off.
You do make a good point about the fact that Clemson's schedule, like as of right now with the AP ranking, like Clemson doesn't play a team remaining that's ranked on their schedule.
Yeah, no, it looks like
so I think the big thing though for them is that kind of means there's less margin of error. If Clemson loses a game and they're 11-1 as an ACC champ, with the last 2 years, we've seen that conference championships actually don't seem to matter quite as much as we thought. And so you could get a scenario where you have, let's say you do have like Notre Dame. And I remember Notre Dame's schedule not being quite as daunting this year, but any team that's 11-1 that doesn't win a conference title this year, but let's say that team wins 4 top 25 games, right? And Clemson wins 0 top 25 games, and they're 11-1, they're ACC champs. I could see the committee leaving them out. Now, what I will say though is Clemson the last few years has been the second best program in football. I think they'll get the benefit of the doubt. But there is definitely not as much margin for error with the ACC, I think, being down a little bit.
Yeah, definitely going to depend when and to who.
Yeah.
I mean, much more forgivable if they lose to, like, I don't know,
like
Wake Forest on the road, who ends up winning like 8 or 9 games.
Sure.
Compared to Boston College on the road, who I think sucks.
Okay, right. So, all right, so those were your marquee games. We'll get into week 3s in a little bit here, but let's go over our week 2. Last week we gave like 1 or 2 bets, good and bad from each guy from the pod. We ended up going I think we were 500 exactly overall for the week. So not as quick of a start as last year that we got out to, but as we start to learn more about these teams, I expect us to be back at 55% or above is where we generally should be. So I'll go over Corey's real quick. His I'd say 1 or 2 of his best bets of the week. He had Eastern Michigan plus 17 at Purdue. They ended up winning that game outright. Might seem a little more fraudulent. It was
trains.
They seem to be a trendy Big West pick this year, and I think this podcast overall wasn't quite as high on them. We felt like there's still room for improvement with that team, but they did lose a lot from their defense, which is what actually was pretty decent last year, and that's starting to show. What's also surprising is, Brahms seems like the kind of coach that doesn't put up with bullshit, and they've had a lot of mistakes, like a lot of penalties, a lot of just basically just screw-ups, like mental screw-ups in the game, and so that's cost them both their first games.
Well, talk about screw-ups. They scored the touchdown with much time left, not a lot of time, and neglected to not go for two to go up 3 points.
Yeah,
so they would have. So Eastern Michigan's field goal would have sent it to overtime compared to win the game.
Yeah, I have no idea.
So that's on coaching right there.
Right.
Terrible decision not to go for two.
Yeah, so Corey nailed that one. Corey also had the Colorado State Rams. They were plus 14.
Colorado State?
14, yeah, our Rams. They were getting 14 at home versus SEC opponent Arkansas, and they actually ended up winning that game outright. They actually, from what I was reading, I didn't get to watch much of that game, but they were down quite a bit, and they had a pretty furious comeback in the second half.
25 straight points.
Yeah.
When I saw that final score, I thought, God, Brett Bielema sucks.
He's not even there. But he still sucks. Yeah,
but he's the coach. It's like, oh my God, he sucks.
Regardless, he still sucks. So, yeah, they end up winning outright. So Corey had 2 double-digit dogs win outright. So that was very good by him.
Impressive, Corey.
Yeah, but we also, we have the red side of things here where, he had a few of us had the same picks, so a few of these are kind of like overlapping, but he had Iowa State plus 4 Iowa. They ended up losing that game by 10. That was a slot fest. We both also had Iowa State, I believe.
Yeah.
The more I thought about that game, that I don't regret that bet, but it might have been like a no bet situation because Iowa State was one of the teams that I think their game was canceled the first week, and so they didn't have a game under their belt. And I feel like teams that have a game under their belt are at a pretty significant advantage. So I probably should have considered that a little bit more, but shit happens. So, Steele, if you want to give like 1 or 2 of your better bets and then 1 or 2 of your
so I had a horrendous week. I was pretty much the anchor that held the group down.
not your best week.
Not my best. Which I'll be honest with you. I think looking back at the stats, I think week 2 or week 3 last year, I had a horrendous week as well.
Yeah.
So apparently week 2 or week 3, I just needed to
just mail it
pull
in.
back.
Yeah, and then you refocus.
Right. Week 0, week 1, we crush, and then week 2 and 3, I just
because you were the only winner of week 1 technically.
Right.
Yeah.
So going forward, 2019, I'm going to have to take a break on week 2 bets. But some of the bad ones quickly that stood out to me was Kevin Sumlin and Arizona, plus 3.5 at Houston. Giving up 45 points to Houston is pretty pathetic.
Yeah.
Only scoring 18 on them is also pretty pathetic.
Yeah.
So that was a bad one. A little bit of a homer bet. I honestly thought Notre Dame was going to score at will against Ball State. Brandon Wimbush played horrendous. The defense actually played pretty well. They were put in a couple of different bad spots with turnovers.
Right.
They were a huge favorite, but a hangover game against Michigan where they kind of just showed up and knew they were going to win and only got an 8-point win.
Right.
Pretty bad bet on my part, again, on the homer side of things, but bad. I also kind of got screwed in a couple games. Air Force backdoored against Lane at FAU.
Yeah.
That was bad. And then I actually had the over in the Minnesota game, which Fresno ran a trick play, which would have tied it and sent it to overtime, and I would have pretty much been assured of the win there. Mm-hmm. So that was a big screw. And then Michigan State sucks at life. And they were, from what I could tell, holding the lead throughout the entire game until they just decided to say we don't even want to win the game.
Yeah.
I actually got that line at -4. A lot of people were at 5, 6, and even 7. Right. And it still didn't even matter because they lost outright. In terms of the good bets, Cincinnati was +1, and they just straight out shut out Miami, Ohio.
Baby. Yeah.
So that was a nice, pretty easy standard win there.
Dude.
Yeah, Purple Cats suck.
Yeah.
Addison, shout out.
Yeah.
They try to tell me to think that the Purple Cats suck. Notre Dame gets there this year. We'll see how good they are.
Yeah.
So those were a couple of the good ones. But overall, a pretty abysmal week, which we'll look to rebound here in week 3, pretty with a little bit more information, like you pointed out. It's not easier, but just more knowledge.
Yeah.
There's more stats. There's more statistics on teams that are auto over bets or auto under bets that have no offense. Mm-hmm. You kind of get a feel for some of the new coaches with their tendencies in terms of play calling and the things of that nature.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out. I didn't, for you guys that maybe aren't bettors yet. I mean, hopefully our podcast will do well enough, to where you guys can follow some of these bets, maybe even piggyback them. But that is a good point that he made. I don't want to make it seem like, well, just because you get later in the year, it makes it easier. But you do pick up on like some tendencies, and the information's everything. You guys know that with anything. So let's get into Addison's good and bad bets. He had Kentucky plus 14.5 at Florida. Kentucky hadn't beaten Florida in 31 games. Snapped that streak by beating them outright down the swamp. So, congrats to them. That's a cover. Good money by Addison. He also had Virginia plus 7, which I believe Corey from Denver also had. And they ended up winning that game outright, I believe.
Who?
Virginia at Indiana, I believe.
Corey definitely had, the ACC.
Yeah, of course. So, loves that ACC. So, yeah, they both know that. Addison also had Maryland minus 16 they covered. Two of his worst bets, which these were ones that he was kind of against the podcast on both of these. He had.
Did he have Western Michigan?
He had Western Michigan.
that was one of my easy ones.
Yeah. He had. I guess I'll add that to one of my wins when I get to mine. But he did have Western Michigan plus 28. He felt like that was too many points. He felt like Michigan was going to have one of those. Like there can be hangovers from when you lose like an emotional game against Notre Dame that they had the week before, but he was on the wrong side of that. And then he also had Kansas State plus 10 at home. And now I understand this bet a little bit more just because like Bill Snyder does cover as a dog a lot, but he has a much, and this is where you guys got to dig a little deeper. He's much better as a road dog than he is as a home dog. He's still good at home, but on the road he's like 24-9 as a road dog. At home he's like 3 or 4 games over 500 the last 10 years. So he does cover, but Steele and Corey and I felt like Mississippi State was just going to punish this football team.
Fitzgerald was back from suspension?
Yeah.
Was it injury or suspension?
I think it was...
Whatever. He didn't play week 1.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Whatever. They went to the Little Apple and they crushed.
Yeah, they murdered. So that's where Addison missed. And I'll get to mine real quick here. We all, as a podcast, when we unanimously make a bet, I feel like most of the time we do pretty well with that. We went with the classic Group of 5 team against Alabama week 2. Alabama's 1-10-2.
Airball.
Their last 13 against that team in week 2, no matter who it is. We took Arkansas State, a team that covered for us a lot last year. They have a pretty good quarterback. They generate enough offense to where we felt like if they just got 2 touchdowns, they would cover.
Yeah, Hansen started his career in Oklahoma. He's no just scrub that they picked out of a walk-on class. Or something. Good.
And not only us, but like Bear, Chris Felica from College Game Day, he usually tends to do very well with his bets. He also liked them, but Bama's a little different with Tua, and I might have to reevaluate these Bama spreads with him in the game because they're just a lot more explosive. They were covering very early in that game. Arkansas State brought it back to where they were covering the third quarter.
Rallied with one touchdown.
They rallied with a touchdown, but then it did nothing. So, yeah, we all missed that. I missed one of my other bad ones was UMass plus 3 at Georgia Southern. I went back to the well for the second straight week with UMass as a dog. They lost by like 3 touchdowns. I hate them. I'm not going to bet them anymore, so that was a bad one. Michigan minus 28, which Steele and I both had. I believe you actually had it with the good side of the hook or whatever. But
yeah, I definitely did.
Yeah, but they were covering like with 11 minutes left in the second quarter. We just felt like they didn't play quite as poorly as people thought against Notre Dame. We felt like they were going to come out swinging, like pissed off. Western Michigan's terrible. So that was an easy bet. And then I did actually have Penn State minus 8.5 at Pitt. That seemed to be like a trendy dog pick, and I like picking against that when the public's heavy on the trendy dog. I felt like Pitt was not much improved from their 5-7 team last year. I felt like Appalachian State was undervalued, and they're actually – I didn't think Penn State played well against Appalachian State, but I didn't feel like – I think people looked at that game and they felt like it was Appalachian State from 10 years ago, and that's not the case. We talked about this on the pod last week. So, yeah, nailed Penn State, had a pretty good week, but – so yeah, moving ahead to, we'll talk about some bets for week 3 in a minute, but let's give our winners real quick and our losers for week 2. My winner, I guess I'll start, was in fact Kentucky football. They snapped their 31-game losing streak. That's actually incredible. You can lose 31 straight times to a team, but they beat Florida down in the swamp. I think that I need to see more from Florida, but that might confirm that Florida and Dan Mullen are not quite where they want to be quite yet. I think we all agree that Mullen's going to probably bring them back to relevance for the most part, but they're not quite there yet. They should not be losing by, 10 plus points to Kentucky, perennial doormat team in the SEC. So, but Kentucky, congrats to them. They're my winner. My loser of the week is Michigan State football. I was curious, and this was a no-bet game for me as far as them playing Arizona State because I didn't know what to expect. I thought Michigan State could kill them, and then I also thought Arizona State could win the game outright, which they did. Herm we made so much fun of Herm, and this guy is getting all the love in the world.
He has not gotten to conference play yet.
Right.
So when I call him a cellar dweller, it's still possible.
It's still very possible. It's also possible that Michigan State's not as good as people thought. They struggled to run the ball against really not it's a Pac-12 defense. Arizona State's not supposed to be that good defensively up front. But they give them credit. They played pretty well in the game from what I saw. But Michigan State, if they're not able to run the football and essentially get some balance on offense, they can't just rely on Milwaukee to win them games. So they could potentially be in some trouble this year.
Herm is ranked and goes to San Diego State as a 4.5-point favorite this week.
Could be a good spot.
That is a tremendous spot for
San Diego State. Yeah, I didn't even realize that. Yeah, we would have to load up on that one. But yeah, do you have a winner and loser of the week?
Loser is I've got a couple losers.
That tends to happen on this pod.
Kevin Sumlin.
Oh yeah, that's
he's kind of a loser. Well, I mean, considering he's 0-2 at Arizona,
yeah.
People were picking them to go like 11-1.
Mm-hmm.
You can't only score 18 points when you have a really good quarterback or at least a dynamic quarterback.
Yeah, exactly right.
Against Houston, and you sure as hell can't give up 45 points to Houston.
Would you agree that, not to, before you get into your winner, not to cut you off, but I was telling these guys in our, group thread that we have that I find it absolutely unacceptable that he is trying to force Khalil Tate to be a pocket passer. To me, that's just terrible coaching. You should play to your kids' strengths, put them in a position to win and be successful. That kid's not the kind of kid that you just drop back and be like, yo, you need to stay in the pocket. You need to look and go through your reads. Let Tate do what he does to help you win games, and that's basically by letting him use his legs. I don't get it. I think someone's one of the most overrated. Yeah, it's just bad, man.
Poor management, which leads to poor coaching, which leads to poor play, really.
Right.
Just not utilizing somebody's talents
right.
The best they can. One more loser for me real quick would be Colorado's kicker. Had the over in the Corn versus Buffs game. He missed 3 chip shots.
I knew you were going to bring that.
He probably shouldn't be on scholarship if he is. Field goal kicking in college football in general across the board is pretty horrendous.
Bad, man. Yeah.
I actually enjoy late in the year watching game casts where you see 23-yard field goal missed.
Yeah.
In all these MACtion games,
yeah.
When they have MAC on 4 days a week.
Yeah.
Because field goal kicking is just really bad, and you should, if you have a kid and you have a boy or a girl, you should teach them how to kick a football because you can get a scholarship for it.
Scholarship, yeah.
Because it's not hard.
Yep.
It's not hard. It's not fucking hard.
It's not hard to put the ball.
But somehow it is. Somehow it is for these kids.
Yeah.
So
the winner of the week
would be Kansas football.
Kansas football.
5-point road dog.
Yeah.
And they won 31-7. I mean, to be quite honest, all these people ragging on them and their program, it's not good. I'm not here saying it is, but
right.
For all the shit they went through in terms of losing to actually a pretty decent FCS team, but we won't get into that.
Yeah.
Just with how much they get ragged on with just, is it basketball season yet? For those kids and that coaching just have to come together to go on the road and get a win against a MAC school or not. It's pretty impressive. So that just their program or team as a whole, kind of on a positive note.
Yeah.
Good for them. They'll probably lose this week, but Rutgers, they suck.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. That's Rutgers is +3, and it seems like everyone's hammering Rutgers. So I don't know. It could be interesting. They probably will lose, but yeah. So those are our winners and losers for the week. Sparty sucks. Kevin Sumlin sucks. Kentucky football, Kansas football, basketball schools making it into the winners.
They're back.
So week 3, we're gonna move ahead and recap our marquee games for week 3. Before we got on the pod, I asked Steele if SC Texas was a marquee game. He said vehemently. No, it is not. They're very mediocre this year. They looked poor last week. We're not going to cover that game, so sorry to you SC and Texas fans if there are even SC fans. I don't know if those actually exist, but we felt that LSU Auburn was potentially a marquee game this week. And the reason is, I think for me personally, I want to see if LSU's for real after how they dominated Miami. Now, I said in the ACC and Notre Dame conference, preseason preview, that I thought Miami was one of the most overrated teams in football this year. And it was only 1 week, so I'm not going to say they confirmed it, but LSU really sucked them good and made them look very mediocre. Malik, I'm sorry, he's apparently pronouncing it Rozier now, is not very good. I don't think Miami's very balanced. I think their defense can't carry them the entire game against very good teams. Now, but this game is LSU Auburn, so I'll talk about LSU for a minute. LSU played nobody.
Ooh, pick six.
Oh, that's going to be good for your over.
That's going to be shipping over.
So I think what I'm curious to see this week is I want to see balance from LSU's offense. I want to see former OSU quarterback transfer to LSU, Joey Burrow. He's looked okay the first 2 weeks. I think they've been pretty conservative with their game plan. But I want to see LSU is going to be forced to open it up. He's going to be forced to be put into a spot where he's got to make throws on third down. Auburn's a very good defense. I predict that I think LSU is going to be a little too conservative on offense. I think that they aren't going to open it up like they need to. And even if they do, I don't feel like they're going to be comfortable enough to do that yet. So I see Auburn kind of smothering them on defense. And I think Auburn...
Is that Darren Lee?
It might have been SC59.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Buckeye. OH. So, I think on the other side of the ball, Auburn, LSU does have a very athletic defense, as always. But I think Stidham is going to do enough to get them down the field. And I think where they might have a possession or two where they get touchdowns, where LSU would get field goals, that's going to be the difference. And I feel like 9.5 is the spread in that game. I actually think that's about right. I'm not going to I don't have a pick as far as against the number on that. I don't think I will perhaps either. But I feel like if I gun to my head, I guess I do take probably LSU in the points. I feel like they could probably keep it within 10. But I do think Auburn comfortably pulls away at the end.
Yeah, so I was thoroughly impressed with Auburn's D-line week 1 against Washington. I thought that was a pretty good litmus test for them out the gates. I think it's going to be a similar matchup for them. I think the game is going to come down to their D-line versus LSU's O-line.
Yeah.
Not terribly impressed with what I've seen offensively from LSU. I mean, it's an improvement, but it's not anything, earth-shattering
right.
in terms of point production or, anything drastically changed. So I'm going to really be keeping an eye on the D-line for Auburn, who's tested out as one of the best in the country so far. So I think, it's going to be won or lost on that line of scrimmage, like it normally is. But is Corey making a pick right now?
Live making
a
pick?
the Excel spreadsheet updates as someone edits it. Never mind. But like you said, is there going to be a play on there? I'm not quite sure.
Okay.
It's the marquee game on CBS, I believe, at 3:30 Eastern.
Addison has LSU plus 10, so...
you said 9.5, obviously.
Yeah.
Ideally get it at 10 if you're looking for the dog opportunity there.
Right.
I just haven't seen quite enough to to take the points with LSU.
Yeah.
So, gun to my head, if I can get it under 10, I would actually take Auburn.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. That's about it for that
Okay,
one.
yeah. So the second game, which is on ABC, their marquee game or whatever, is going to be TCU and Ohio State.
Huh.
They're going to be in Arlington, Texas, but that's technically a neutral game. I think how the tickets are allocated will be 50-50. Ohio State's going to buy those up. I foresee Ohio State being like 70-30 in Jerry World. So even though it's in Arlington, Texas, I don't think it's like at TCU like people think it is. That line it opened at, I believe, 13.5. I've seen it anywhere from 12.5 to 13.5. And it kind of surprised me, actually. I actually thought it'd be closer to like 16.5. But I got to be careful with this game because for you guys that do watch the pod, you know that Addison and I are Ohio State fans, and I would say that it's. I would say that you would agree that Addison's a little bit more homer than me. Like I tend to be a little bit more rational with my OSU. I don't usually bet on Ohio State, but I did bet him week 1 because I thought they'd slaughter Oregon State. I should have bet him last week, but I didn't want to. This was the first bet I made this week, and I couldn't press the button fast enough. Like I loaded up units on Ohio State. The reason for that is that when we previewed TCU earlier this year in the Big 12 podcast, we said we like TCU's coaching staff. We were big fans of Gary Patterson. TCU tends to play well against any kind of elite opponent that they go against, but we felt like their possible weakness this year was on their offensive line and their quarterback play. And their quarterback, Robinson, I think it's Sean Robinson, he's very athletic. He can make some plays with his legs, but when I was watching them, scouting them, I should say, against SMU on Friday night, I wasn't very impressed with that O-line. Now, I did see where I saw kind of come to fruition like the problems with that offensive line. And when you're going against a defensive line like Ohio State has, I see major problems developing for TCU. I think Ohio State is going to bring their safeties up. I think they're going to force Robinson to beat them through the air, which I don't see happening. And even though Ohio State's played Oregon State and Rutgers, I like the command of the offense that Haskins has. There's a lot of weapons on the field. I actually think Ohio State's going to blow these guys out. Like I think they're going to beat them by at least 3 touchdowns. You guys can call it homer all you want, but I'm usually pretty rational with Ohio State, but I think they're absolutely going to slaughter TCU in Arlington. How do you feel about that game? Where would you lean as far as the number?
Yeah.
I know it pains you to say that.
Yeah, if Ohio State has shown a vulnerability or weakness so far, it's in the secondary. I think the coaching staff, from all accounts and the visualization and what you can see on the field, is they're not happy with the production from the secondary. So if TCU is able to make some gap plays, that would be, I guess, the opportunity that TCU has. But I don't think the opportunity is going to be that often in that game, just based on the fact that their O-line is so weak and your D-line is so strong. So there might be a play or two or a point, a touchdown or two for TCU to be had just because your secondary play hasn't been so great. I don't know, maybe it improves from last week.
It was a little better. I think where it hasn't been so much. I think I know where you're going with it. Like it hasn't been as much the pass D, but it's been blown assignments from not Jordan Fuller. He's a captain, All-American. He's played fine. Isaiah Pryor's been a little leaky as far as blowing assignments. The linebackers against Oregon State were blowing some assignments in the run game, so we were giving up some big gash plays. I think that is a good point, and they look better against Rutgers, but it's fucking Rutgers. So TCU was able to run the ball in SMU. They have playmakers. The quarterback can run. So I think, to your point, that is something that you would have to watch for.
Right. And even if they capitalize on that, there's, 2 or 3 possible opportunities.
Yeah.
I don't see OSU scoring less than 35. So
I agree.
I think that's almost, it's going to be a close to the number game if TCU literally capitalizes on all their opportunities, and I don't even think they will.
Yeah.
So I think that puts you in a position of Ohio State. It is, like you kind of said, like a 17 or 21 point win.
Yeah.
And it could get ugly, early and often if Ohio State brings the offense that they have brought the first couple of weeks.
Yeah,
TCU generally really good on defense, and they've ranked preseason in terms of, unit rankings really high. In terms of actual defensive units, but I think it's a different animal compared to what they typically see. I think Haskins has been the real deal in terms of, offensive production, where people were kind of like, what are we going to do without JT?
Yeah.
Well, this is what you're going to do without
pass
JT.
the ball down the field, yeah.
So I think OSU scores in the 40s. I think at maximum, TCU has 21 points.
That's
which,
exactly what I was thinking.
Havertz just got killed.
Yep.
I was
thinking like
OSU covers.
Yeah, I was thinking like 42-21. I think, would you agree? I think TCU cannot afford a slow start because they can't get behind where they're throwing the whole time. Like they they have to get out to a fast start, I think.
Yeah, you can say that in most scenarios for most teams, too.
Right.
If I were them, I would take the play clock down to 1 every time they go to minimize the
possessions. That's the thing, too. They're running more tempo, and it's like you got to get first downs to maintain that. So I foresee that. I think we feel the same way, and I think the podcast feels pretty much the same about that. I think Corey also has OSU minus 13, but that's how we feel about those games. I think we feel that Auburn takes care of business at home against LSU, and we feel Ohio State takes care of business against TCU. So we don't see any upsets there, perhaps. But as far as bets for Week 3, I guess I'll start with mine real quick just to get it out of the way. I'll give you guys one, and just like last week, I will have the bets up in the video description under the video on the channel. For as the week goes along, I'll keep adding our bets for the week, and you guys can see them on there. They'll be very transparent, so that there's no funny business going on with like different numbers or anything like that. But the one bet that I really like a lot this week, and Corey from Denver is with me on this, is Army -6 on the East Coast at noon against Hawaii. Now, Hawaii this year, the first 2 games, they were double-digit dogs and they won outright. So Hawaii was an undervalued team. They weren't, valued accordingly. Addison and I touched base on that in the last podcast when we talked about Hawaii. We said that they might not be such easy bets moving forward, but it's interesting now that they seem to be like the trendy underdog this week. I've talked about that, where I feel like when I see the public hammering the trendy underdog, Hawaii's won as double-digit dogs twice this year already. They're playing Army, who's not viewed as a very strong team, but you've got contrasting styles. You have what essentially is a 6 a.m. kickoff for Hawaii as a noon Eastern kick. So with all that travel, I'm not sure how many days they're arriving on the East Coast beforehand, but I like Army, and I'll give the 6 there. So I'll let you go ahead and give 1 or 2 of your bets for the week.
Yeah, so I would, not even knowing the total, not even having an idea about it, that would be a first surefire under bet for me.
Okay.
The hurricane coming in. Always check the weather forecast, folks.
For sure, yeah.
The hurricane is supposed to hit the Carolinas and Virginia area, I believe, Friday and linger into Saturday and Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously keeping an eye on that. Having the weather app on your phone is a tremendous asset.
Absolutely.
But if they're playing that in Rutherford, New Jersey, probably is that where Army plays their game? Somewhere West Point.
Yeah, West Point.
If any sort of inclement weather comes there and slows down Hawaii's passing game, and Army's already going to run the ball, I think that's going to be a close game. And I would lean the under on many of the East Coast games this week. A lot of the totals are not up yet, which is fine. It's best to get your bets in on the sides first, and then you can kind of work out the totals later in the week. I've got a couple booked already. Dangerous coming off a bad week to go with favorites, I think, but the lines dictate the bets. The bets don't dictate the lines.
Right.
And that would be Oklahoma State -3 home against Boise State. Look at the Jets. Look at the Jets go.
There it is.
They're back.
They're back.
And then also Miami, Florida actually goes to Toledo, and they're only a 10-point favorite, road favorite.
I think you're on the opposite side of that.
You've got Toledo +10.
I got +10.5. I got Toledo.
Yeah.
We'll see. Yeah.
The MAC.
I took Toledo last year in this game, and they had it wrapped up easily, and then blew not only the game but the cover also. So it's a little like
what was the spread? Like 17 points.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. It was a joke. So yeah.
I think the U coming off a pretty poor performance from LSU. They righted the ship in terms of
they looked a lot
crushed opponent last week. I think you're going to get about 3 or 4 points of value there. I've got another slight homer pick for Notre Dame -14 at home against Vanderbilt. I think that's a little bit of value there.
I do too.
I wouldn't take it anything over 14, but Vanderbilt actually is 2-0, and they crushed Nevada last week.
They look good.
And then, obviously, Notre Dame coming off their horrendous performance against Ball State. I think that line should be in the 17. I think you're going to get a few points of value there just of last week's perception. Yeah. I think it will indeed get bet up because Notre Dame's such a public favorite heavy side. that they get bet heavily and often with a lot of money. So if it goes higher, much higher than that, I wouldn't take it. But if you can get that number before it rises, do it. And then one of my last bets currently booked, I'm sure I'll add more before Saturday, is Florida State at Syracuse -4. If Syracuse is going to score points, it's probably going to be on a Dino Babers led Syracuse team.
Yeah.
So if Willie Taggart wants to score 50 or 60, I think you can.
Yeah.
I think just overall talent in terms of recruiting cycles and classes, if they bring any sort of effort with them, I think they should be able to cover that pretty easily.
Yeah, I think that's another one to watch for the total. There could be a lot of points in that, so that could be one to look at when that comes out. But you and Addison and Corey from Denver all actually have Florida State. I've looked at that game. I'm not sure about it yet. I want to look into it a little bit more. But I think it's one of those spots where I believe when I looked at it, most of the bets were on like taking Syracuse the dog. Like Florida State's looked really bad the first 2 weeks. But I think there is a pretty large talent gap. If Taggart can get it together in game 3, they should be able to score on Syracuse. I mean, Jesus, Western Michigan did. So I think that could potentially, there could be a lot of value in Florida State there. But I'll have to look at it a little bit closer. But if we want to get into Addison's, and Corey will give a couple of theirs real quick. So Addison had Florida State and LSU. I already mentioned that. That's the only 2 he has of now. Corey has, I thought an interesting one of Corey's was Pitt +3.5. Versus Georgia Tech, and that's interesting because Pitt looked really bad this Saturday, and I don't know if that is Corey possibly playing contrarian, thinking that there's some value that Pitt's not as bad as they looked against Penn State. It is going to be run the ball, play run defense. That plays kind of more into Pat Narduzzi's hands, but that also plays into Georgia Tech's hands. So I would like to see, or I guess find out what his reasoning is for that. But that is one of his bets. He, like I said, he also has Army with me. He has Missouri -7 at Purdue. That could end up being there could be a lot of value in that. Purdue just hasn't looked the part this year, and Missouri has a tendency the last few years to essentially route inferior talent. So there could be some value in that bet. But anything else you want to add about the bets or for this upcoming week?
Better games.
Yeah, I think so.
That'll be fun.
Yeah, should be all right.
Night game. Watch out.
Yeah, and yeah. Like I said, I think OSU's going to murder TCU, but I think we're once we get after week 3 here, we're going to start to really learn a little bit more about these teams. I think LSU and OSU specifically, and there's some other mid-tier games that look pretty good. So yeah, if you guys have any comments or if any questions about the bets that we made or anything else, put it in the comment section as always. And I guess until next week.